Okay, so good evening again, Rabbi Sai, and sorry for I think Sunday I was a no-show. So we were up to we needed to just finish off one Nakuda about Masechet Shabbat b'Shabbos. So the Gemara says three things that Ashi told me in the name of Rabbi Shua Nevi, and the third was Masechet Shabbat b'Shabbos chayv mishum Mechatech Masechet Shabbat was a little unclear how to translate it. So Tosfos says that it was already murabas mutakenes, it was already squared off and sorted out, and all the person was doing was putting lines in it. And that's why it is Mechatech as opposed to Mechatech and Memachek. The Ran and the Meiri consider the possibility that when the Gemara says you're chai for Mechatech, you meant to say you're also chai for Mechatech, in addition to Mechatech and Memachek. And Achanami, you're chai for three melachos. We mentioned briefly that there's a little bit of a chiddush in this, that you can be chayav for Mechatech plus another melacha. Mechatech normally means the sort of catch-all melacha. If it isn't another melacha, then you're chayav for Mechatech. Otherwise, we would ask why you're not chayav every time you bake a loaf of bread. You've finished the loaf of bread off. Every time you build a building, it's boina. Every time you finish weaving a garment and sewing it together, it's Mechatech. Every melacha should also be Mechatech, and one of the answers to the question is that it's only Mechatech when it's not another melacha. If it's another melacha, then the melacha you've done is baking or sewing or weaving or building, not Mechatech. Evidently, the Ran and the Meiri don't consider this a reasonable answer, and they consider the possibility that all the Gemara means is you're also chayav for Mechatech, but of course you're not just chayav for Mechatech, you're also chayav for Mechatech and Memachek. So they answer. Then the second answer that they give is that Memachek is only a choshev melacha to the degree that it adds a necessary functionality. If it's just the uppers to beautify, that's not the melacha. The melacha Mechatech, Memachek, you seem to be saying is smoothing is not a significant enough outcome unless it's vital, unless it adds a functionality. If you're just smoothing to make something a little bit prettier, a little bit more beautiful, that's not chashuv enough to be a melacha. It has to be smoothing done for a real need, otherwise it's not melacha. That was the second answer they gave. The third answer to the question is this Rabbeinu Parachia that I printed, quoting the Rambam, who in turn is quoting the Rimigash. I gave 2 weeks ago a little hesped for the Rimigash. I'm not going to repeat that, but the Rimigash is a very profound influence on the Rambam and the conceptual thinking of the Rambam in the Lomdus and Halacha. And I struggled a little bit with what the Rimigash is saying, what Rabbeinu Parachia is quoting from the Rambam in the name of the Rimigash. I mentioned that to the best of my knowledge, we do not have this Rambam. This was a Rambam that was lost and was only preserved by Rabbeinu Parachia, who in turn is quoting the Rambam, who's quoting the Rimigash. And Rabbeinu Parachia's chiluk, his lomda seems to be the Mechatech is when you are trimming down to measure. In other words, you're removing that which is surplus and left behind, as opposed to Mechatech, which is when you're changing the object itself, when you're doing a melacha in the object itself. So if you have the object as it is, but the object needs shaping a little bit and forming, then that is Mechatech. If you have an addendum to the object, extras to the object, like hairs sticking out of cloth, which is surplus to requirement, then that's the melachah of Mechatech. So Mechatech is cutting off that which is extra, and therefore, in a sense, he says the melachah is being done not in the object atzma, not in the guf, not in the guffa object, guffa or atzma, but you're cutting away that which is surplus. Cutting away that which is surplus, that's the melacha of Mechatech. However, if it's in the object itself, then that's not the melacha of Mechatech, that's Mechatech. So when you have an object where you're not cutting away that which is surplus, but you're forming the object and shaping the object itself, that's Mechatech. When you're cutting away that which is surplus, that is the melacha of Mechatech. Mechatech means trimming away that which is surplus, and makeh b'patish is forming it into the correct shape that it's meant to be. That's how I understood the lomdus of the Rimegash. I don't know if anyone else, if that's how anyone else understood it, but that was, to the best of my ability, my understanding of what he was saying. Did anyone else come to any clearer conclusion as to what you meant?
So I had a question about my Zobin. Sorry, it's a bit tricky. But we just thought we learned through just now the Me'iri, which seemed to imply that actually it was the Hefech, in a sense, in terms of the Me'iri just now on makeh b'patish seemed to imply that you can only be makeh b'patish if the activity is already completed. And when the work's finished, then when you're doing a final bit on it, which could be knocking away the stone because it's all completed as a beautiful stone and it's just removed from the mountain or whatever, that's makeh b'patish, which would be the hefech of what we just, the understanding which was just presented in the Rabbeinu.
Bracha in the Rimegash. We will look at the Meiri later. I spent a lot of time in this Meiri and struggled with it a little bit. I think the Meiri is saying a different point. I think the Meiri is saying that makeh b'patish does not mean the completion of an interim stage. It means the completion of the final object. So when you are writing a book, the last two letters of the book complete the melachot of kosev, but they don't complete the book because there's still other things to be done, binding the book and putting it into shape or whatever it is. So therefore he says that's not makeh b'patish. Similarly, when you harvest grain, it's true you've finished the harvesting, but it's not makeh b'patish because this is all an interim stage to get to the final product, which is, let's say, bread. So I think he's saying that makeh b'patish is not finishing off a stage, it's finishing off the product. And therefore makeh b'patish is only when you finish off the product. And therefore, all other melachos that you complete, it's true you've completed the melacha, and something is achieved through the completion of the melacha, but it's still interim in the sense that you haven't accomplished and produced the final object that you want. So I think that's the longest the Meiri is saying makeh b'patish. The Rimegash, I don't think is getting into that. He's saying whatever makeh b'patish is, which is presumably you would agree with him, Meiri, is completing the object. And you complete the object by Masechet as ever, by smoothing down the stone. But he's saying none of this is the melacha of Mechatech. Mechatech is trimming away the excess, whereas makeh b'patish is completing the object itself. And therefore, Mechatech is the melacha in the excess, whereas makeh b'patish is the melacha in the object in the object itself. That's how I understood the story of the Rimegash.
So if according to him, if you cut a piece of paper in half and you wanted both halves, would that be makeh b'patish?
I don't know, because in the case of the paper, you already have the functionality of the paper. You're just changing its size, but you already have a functional piece of paper. And if I don't know if that would be makeh b'patish. Okay, so this is I think completing the that which was left over the Mechatech from the last sugya of Masechet Shabbat, which I didn't quite finish off on the previous share. I want to move on to the next statement of Omer Reb Shimon ben Kisma, Omer Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Hatzah Surah Bekli, V'Mamapech Kli Zechuch Chayiv Mishamak and Batish. So there's two melachos which we're going to take one by one. The first melacha is Tzah Surah Bekli, is chayiv mishum makeh b'patish. If you etch a picture on a utensil, you're chayiv for makeh b'patish. So the point I simply wanted to talk about on this sugya is the kasha which really the Biur Halacha brings on the Gemara on the Rambam. The Gemara says that you're chayiv mishum makeh b'patish, and indeed this is what the Rambam paskins in Perek Yud Halacha Tes Zayin. And the Rambam says makeh b'patish. I put this in the source sheet. Takar achat chayiv. Chaloi sedavar shegmar melachah is told us makeh b'patish chayiv. Ketzad, and he brings the example of kli zechuchis, which we'll go into in a few minutes. And he brings an example of tsar kli b'kitzura, afilu miktas asura, etc. All these cases, he says, is makeh b'patish. However, the Rambam also says that Roshem is in Perek Gadol that Roshem is a toldas kosev, and is a tolda the melacha of kosev. Keitzad, what is Roshem? Roshem Yeshiva v'tzuras b'kosel, etc. So the Rambam says if you are Roshem Rishimas, if you etch out marks, then you are chayev for the melacha of kosev or tolda of kosev by etching out marks. So the big question is, why are you not chayev? Why does the Gemara say you're chayev for makom patish? Why doesn't the Gemara say that you're chayev for roshem or kosev? So this is again really a little bit off sugya because it's a bit more about the malacha of kosev than the malacha of makom patish. The Biur Halacha just to dip our toes into the malacha of kosev. The Biur Halacha, which I printed, asks this question in the name of the Eliyah Rabbah. And the Biur Halacha answers as follows. He says, if you etch the outline of the shape of a picture, then this is the malacha of Roshem, which is a tolda of kosev. Why is it a tolda of kosev? Because the concept of the malacha of writing is forming shapes which convey information, carry information. Letters, which is the classic form of kosev, carry information, they communicate, they bear content, they carry content. And drawing an outline carries content. What sort of content does it carry? The content it carries is telling the next craftsman who fills in the roshem with a color how to fill in, what shape to fill in. And the person who fills it in is the melacha of Soveya. Now, what is the melacha of Soveya and what is the melacha of kosev? Kosev means that it carries information. The chashivas of the melacha of kosev is in the shape itself. The shape carries information, it communicates, and that's the chashivas of the melacha. Soveya isn't that it carries information. The significance of Soveya, dying, isn't in the shape itself. The significance is in the object behind the object that you are dyeing. The significance is that it is beautifying or coloring something. So the significance is an object behind the color, that through Soveya, the object becomes colored. So this is the melacha of Soveya, and this is the melacha of kosev or roshem. Kosev is that the information, the shape, carries significance, and therefore the significance is in the lettering or in the reshima that you make, versus Soveya, where the significance is an object which becomes beautified or colored through the coloring that is put to it. What is the information that roshem carries? The guidance to the Soveya how to fill it in. Says the Mishnah Berurah, therefore, that if you are etching a shape on a utensil in order to offer guidance to the person who will then color the utensil, that's the melacha of kosev because it's carrying information, and the one who colors it in is Soveya. He says in this case, there's no coloring that's taking place. It's just you're etching a shape to beautify the object, in which case this is neither melacha. It's not the melacha of Soveya because you're not coloring anything. And it's not the melacha of kosev because the etching of the shape is not to carry information, but to beautify the object. So this is the logic of the Mishnah Berurah. Now, why don't we look at the shape and view the shape as a picture? And the picture conveys information. If I do an outline of a simple sketch house or a stick man that carries information, why is that not kosev? So either because the shape over here isn't a picture, it's simply an ornamental shape, and therefore it doesn't carry information, or even if it's a picture, maybe the Mishnah Berurah is saying the purpose of the picture is to beautify the object, not the information that it carries, and therefore in a sense it's bottled, it's insignificant to the object, it's beautification of the object, and therefore it's not the melacha. Either way, the logic of the Mishnah Berurah is that kosev is carrying information, this isn't carrying information, and Soveya is coloring an object, this isn't coloring an object, and therefore it's neither melacha over here. That's the answer the Mishnah Berurah gives to this question, and I wanted to mention it because these are important Mara Makomis in understanding the melachas of Soveya and kosev. Any ha'aros on this, or is this how people understood the Mishnah Berurah? Okay. Josh, I don't know if you're trying to unmute yourself. Or...
Yeah, no, I was. So, would we say that there's no much of a partition in the case of the surveyor with the Roshan and surveyor? Yeah, you're saying there's no much of a partition because that is dyeing, which is a full-blown melachot in itself, and you'd have to have some sort of extra sprinkles at the end to do a makabeh partition on that.
Correct. The simplest answer to why there isn't makabeh partition in this case is because as soon as there's another malacha, by definition, it's chashivas as another malacha, not as makabeh partition. Makabeh partition is when you're finishing off by not doing any other malacha. If you're doing another malacha, then that trumps. That's the more significant effect, and therefore that trumps it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So this seems to be the principle of Shiur here, which again I think is an important Torah. Let us carry on then. The next chidush of the Gemara is menafeach kli zechuch chayiv mishum makeh patish. So here I put a reference to our previous sugya, to iron dollars on the base, when we learned the sugya of boiner binyan b'kedim, because Tosfos, very briefly, just the Maramakomis over here, Rashi on iron dollars on the base said a rule. Rashi says ein binyan b'kedim. Explanation of the rule, there is a malacha called boiner. What exactly is the malacha? We'll look at in more detail in a few moments. But the general malacha of boiner is constructing things. Rashi says that construction of an object attached to the ground, like a house or a tent or a canopy or a wall, this is where the malacha of boiner is relevant. Construction of a keli, ein binyan kelim. This is the view of Rashi. Tosfos, then ein dollars on the base, adopts the position or considers the position that yesh binyan b'kelim. And Tosfos asks, in that case, why are you not chayiv for boiner if you're menapeach kli zechuches? Surely you have constructed a keli, and construction of a keli should be boiner according to at least this opinion. So why is there no melacha of boiner in our sugya? Why is there only the melacha of makabeh patish? This is Tosfos' question, and Tosfos leaves this question unanswered. He leaves it unresolved. Very, very interesting. As far as I remember, he doesn't give a resolution to this question. He leaves the question as an open-ended question. So what can we say about it? So again, this is really the melacha of boiner rather than makabeh patish, but it's a chance for us to do a little bit of chazar and learn a little bit more in depth of what the melacha of boiner is. So there are a number of answers that are suggested. I think in the source sheets I printed Moshe Feinstein's Moshe Feinstein's approach to this issue, and also I printed various Rambams, which I thought might offer you some insight into the answer. So I'm going to share two approaches to this. The first answer is that of Moshe Feinstein. If you look at his Teshuvah, he says as follows. He says that making a utensil, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, making a utensil from nowhere, from nothing, is certainly, everyone would agree, is the melacha of boiner. Why is it the melacha of boiner? Because all I had was objects or pieces of material, and I've now put these pieces of material into shape, and I've produced a keli. Of course, that's a melacha. How can anyone argue with it that that's a melacha? The question around kelim is what happens if I have a pre-existing utensil and I simply make it bigger, I expand it, I add something to it. This is what the discussion around yesh binyan b'kelim and ein binyan b'kelim is about. And therefore, Moshe Feinstein says that if I have a utensil and I expand it, that's not the melacha of boiner, because it's just a utensil. I already have the functionality. I'm just enlarging it. That isn't poshim enough to be a melacha. With something which is mechuber l'karka, when I'm building on the ground, every extra expansion I make of it, that's the melacha of boiner. With a keli, where all it is functionality, it's not a building on the ground. If I add to it, it's not the melacha. Says Ramosha, based on that's the reason there's no boiner over here, because the glass blowing that we're talking about is a case where you have already started the keli, and this is the completion of the keli. The completion of the keli means there already was a keli there, and therefore you're not chayiv for the melacha of boiner because you already have a utensil you're simply expanding it. Now, I'm not entirely sure in Ramosha what the metzius is of how he's understanding this glass blowing is. He says, Nasa B'tzuras Kli Al Yedei HaDefus. You've already stamped out with a defus, with a press. You've already pressed the shape of the utensil, and the glass blowing is just expanding it. Glass blowing that I've seen, I've gone to look at glass blowing on several occasions. They take a ball of glass, they attach a tube to it and blow into it, and that expands the ball of glass, which means it's making the air which goes in creates a bubble in the glass, which creates the utensil for nothing. Moshe seems to be saying, if that would be the case, that you were literally forming a hole inside the utensil, there everyone would agree that that is bona, because I've created from nothing a new kli. However, here he says the cases where you already have a kli and you are simply expanding it, that wouldn't be the melacha of bona. Interestingly, it looks to me like Moshe has got himself a little bit caught up here in a machlokas rishonim around this topic. Because what is the scenario in our Gemara? So if you look in Rashi, Rashi seems to say you are making the kli from nothing. Rashi is menafech b'kli blowing into a kli zuchachis. Kashahusach, when it's melted, nasa al yedei nefach is made through blowing. So Rashi seems to say, which is what I've observed in glass blowing, is the best of my understanding, that you melt glass and then you blow into it, and that's what produces the utensil. So Rashi seems to be saying that you're taking the utensil and making something out of nothing. The Shiur run on the Mishnah speaks about the definition of makeh b'patish, and the example he gives is kanefach b'kli zuchachis ham sheni, on the second time. So the first time you blow into the kli zuchachis, he says that's not makeh b'patish because you're just forming the shape. The second time you blow into it, you're now tweaking it and perfecting it and fine-tuning it to make a perfect utensil. That's the melacha of makeh b'patish. So this very much supports Ramosha Feinstein's stance. The first blow, which is maybe taking a blob of glass, and either with a press, as Ramosha says, or with a fast blow, as the run seems to say, produces a airspace within the vacuum, a hole within the glass, makes the utensil. That maybe would be the melacha of bona, because you're making a utensil. The second blow, that's makeh b'patish, because it's simply tweaking it and fine-tuning it, and therefore it's not the melacha of bona. So just to summarize what we've said, there seems to be machlokes to show you what this glass blowing is. Is it like Rashi says, glass blowing from nothing? Or is it glass blowing from something? It's the second blow, there's already a shape, and you're simply fine-tuning it. If it's glass blowing from nothing, then we understand why it's bona. Sorry, we would think it should be bona, and maybe among people it's makeh b'patish, who knows? But why is it not bona? If it's a second blow of glass, then Ramosha's principle works. He says you're simply expanding a kli. Expanding a kli is not bona, because the kli already exists. You're simply expanding it, and therefore all it could be is makeh b'patish. It would turn out very beautifully, according to Ramosha then, that we understand why Rashi says it's the first blow of glass. Because don't forget, Rashi on Ein Daled Amud Beis was the one who argues on Tosfos. Rashi said, "Ein binyan b'kelim." There is no concept of bona with the kli. If there's no concept of bona with the kli, then even the first blow of glass, which makes something from nothing, it produces the bubble in the glass, and that maybe is the whole thing that accomplishes the building of this vase that you are building. Nonetheless, ein binyan b'kelim, the melacha of bona is not applicable to kelim. The melacha of bona is done in the ground. However, Tosfos and other Rishonim who learn yesh binyan b'kelim, there is binyan b'kelim, they would have to learn, according to Ramosha, that we're talking about when there is already a kli and you're simply blowing further into it to enlarge it or to fine-tune it, in which case there wouldn't be bona, but there would be the melacha of makeh b'patish. So this is one way of understanding the relationship between bona and makeh b'patish and what's going on in our sugya. This is one mahalich. A second way of understanding, which is not my own, but comes from Reb Issa Zalman Meltzer, who's a Talmud of Reb Chaim Priska, and wrote a commentary on the Rambam. He argues that if we look with care at the language of the Rambam, and I think I printed the relevant Rambams on the source sheet. If you look with care at the Rambam says as follows. And the first Rambam is that I wanted to look at is Perek Zayin Halacha Vav, and then the Rambam talks about cheese making. And he says that in the context of the Rambam, by the way, I should mention this in Perek Zayin. Perek Zayin is the beginning of melachos, when the Rambam is explaining the principles. He lists the lamatas melachos, and then he explains what an av is and what a tolda is, and he gives some examples. And one of the examples of a tolda that he gives is cheese making. And he says if you do cheese making, you're chayav because of boina. Absolutely fascinating. You create a cheese, a lump of cheese, and that's the melacha of boina. Why? And he's explaining what a tolda is, because it says, "Kol makabitz chelek al chelek, v'dovak hakol at sheyasik echad." How is there domin opinion? If you gather parts to parts and you stick together parts to make a new whole, this is similar to boina, and therefore it's holder of boina. Now, if you look at the Rambam in Perik Yud Halacha Yud Beis, the Rambam says that it is boina even if you don't add parts together, but you smooth a mountain, a hillside, or you carve out space, or you put stones on top, or you cement the stones. All these scenarios are boina. Similarly, he says that a tolda of boina is, in Halacha Yud Gimel, if you spread a tent, a canopy, that's also boina. So what the Rambam seems to be saying is that the Av Melacha of boina is putting together piece upon piece to create a new building. Out of that are two toldas, two descendants. Descendant number one is a building in the ground, even if it doesn't involve putting piece to piece, like spreading a canopy, like cementing stones together. And tolda number two is adding piece to piece. So if it's in the ground, the Av Melacha is adding pieces together, bricks together, to create a structure in the ground. That's the Av Melacha. Tolda number one is creating a structure in the ground, even when it's not piece by piece. Tolda number two is when it's not in the ground, but then it needs to piece by piece. So the tolda has to have one similarity to the Av, either being combination of pieces, even though it's not in the ground, or being in the ground, even though there's no combination of pieces. Therefore, argues the Even Ozul, when you make cheese, the Rambam says, since it's not in the ground, what makes the melacha is the combining of piece to make a new whole. If it was in the ground, then creating a new structure would be a melacha, even if it's not putting piece to create a new whole. Therefore, the Even Ozul argues that glass blowing is not the melacha of boina. It's not in the ground, and it isn't combining piece by piece. Boina is combining lots of pieces together to create a new structure. With glass blowing, it is true you are creating a utensil, but you're not creating a utensil by combining pieces and putting pieces together. You're creating a new utensil by blowing the glass out. That isn't the melacha of boina, because the melacha of boina with kelim is combining piece by piece, according to the Rambam. So this is how the Even Ozul tidies up the issue. So just to summarize what we've said, we finished off the last year in which we looked at Masechet Shabbat, and we saw different answers as to why in the case of Masechet Shabbat there's no Mechatech. And we then looked at Reb Shimon Kisner, who said that Hatzar B'Kli is Chayav Mishamaka B'Patish, and we discussed why it's not writing. We said the Mishnah Berurah's principle that writing is carrying information. If it's decorative, then the only melacha you can get someone on is tzeveya, and if no color is involved, there's no tzeveya. The melacha of kosev is communicating, carrying information. The melacha of tzeveya is coloring. A decorative shape on something is neither coloring nor communication, and therefore it's not the melacha of tzeveya, it's not the melacha of kosev, all it is makar b'patish. And then we saw glass blowing. Why is glass blowing not boina b'kelim? Three answers. Either Rashi, who says that's ein binyan b'kelim, here's the whole thing, or the Even Ozul's principle in the Rambam that boina with kelim is combining pieces to make a new whole. When you're glass blowing, you're combining pieces, but you're making a new keli, but you're not combining pieces to make a new whole. Or the principle of Moshe Feinstein that expanding a utensil is not boina, only creating a new utensil from nothing is boina. But with glass blowing, there's a ready utensil, we're simply expanding it, and therefore it's not melacha boina. And with that, we finish what I wanted to share for today. And with Hashem, on Sunday, we'll carry on the continuation of the sugya, which is Haiman, the Shokol, Kofi Meglimi.
Thank you.
Thank you.